Hello and welcome to Energy Voice Out Loud, the weekly news podcast that keeps you up to date on the hottest stories from the UK energy market. This week, BP decided to sell up its North Sea assets.
The last big super major, with a big history in the North Sea.
Erikka's been out in Ardersier.
Deploy maybe about 7 of these squids.
And finally, someone's deciding to take Prax to court. Well, that's what our editor thinks.
177 million of fraud they've accused them of.
That's a lot to talk about if you trust me, Aberdeen Features lead Ryan Duff, but thankfully I'm joined by a crack team of reporters this week in this all-new, all-video version of Out Loud by Energy Voice. I'm joined by Erikka Askeladd, news editor. How are you doing now that people can see you as well as listen to your dulcet tones?
You wouldn't believe the effort that I put in this morning already, but hopefully it'll pay off dividends. I'm enjoying this. Kind of welcome to the faces of Energy Voice as well. How exciting is this?
Yeah, and Floyd, are you ready for your close-up, Mr. Dubois?
I am, but I still rolled out of bed 5 minutes to 9, so yeah, forgive me, but this is how I look these days.
I feel the patriarchy is very much in effect today. You know, Erikka's saying that she's put a lot of effort in, and I'll be honest, I just threw on a shirt, so I can't really say anything.
You've not even put your glasses on. So,
no, I've literally taken them off because they were the light for the recording was reflecting off of them. So I've taken them off rather than getting sort of dressed up. I've got dressed down, I guess, this week. But do you know what's also getting dressed down? That is BP's portfolio. It's looking to sell off its UK business as it's vacating the North Sea, or at least intending to do that. Obviously, they'll need to find a buyer. Erikka, you were Johnny on the spot last week. You know, that was the news broke on Friday, so exactly a week before this podcast went live. Although we did kind of hint at it in last week's episode. We mentioned it before news broke. Then our podcast went out, and it seemed like we were predicting the future.
Yeah, so I mean, it was kind of the reason why we thought they were on the cards is because there had been rumors that already they had been approaching Ithaca about whether or not they'd buy Clare, which is their big West of Shetland play. And it turned out that at the time it kind of looked like that part of the deal fizzled. But as you say, last week we were saying, well, they are the last big super major, with a big history in the North Sea to have made a decision. And Meg O'Neill, the chief executive, so she just recently celebrated her first full quarter in the hot seat, and she has got a broom for when it comes to what's going on with BP and their assets. They're making a lot of decisions about what they're doing, and what did she say? She's like, not sentiment nor history will be how they're going to be making their decisions about what they're going to be selling. And now that means like everything in the North Sea is up for the chop because there's no room for sentimentality when it comes to investing in global oil and gas these days. And I think when she first took over the job, one of her first roles was to come and sit down with Keir Starmer talking about the energy industry, and it kind of thought that they probably from that point on decided maybe the UK isn't a place to be putting our money.
Yeah, it was an interesting first day in post for Meg O'Neill, wasn't it? Like you say, she met up with Keir Starmer in those talks that was announced by former Chancellor, we can say now, Rachel Reeves. When we didn't get that reform to the windfall tax that was maybe rumored ahead of the last budget, and she sort of came in and had this meeting, and since then she's looked to sort of pare down the business, drive profitability, and we know for a few years now, BP has kind of been struggling to match the sort of share price and the value of its super major counterparts. And as you say, this was the last. This is the last super major to announce its intent to leave the UK.
Yes.
We've seen
Well, let's
Total.
remind everyone. So Shell has put all its North Sea operations into a joint venture.
Well,
Uh,
actually, that's the
oh,
fun one, isn't
well,
it? Because
maybe not
technically,
quite
it still
yet.
has
Not quite
technically the
yet.
two operated super majors with a still operating asset in the North Sea is ExxonMobil, which is funny because we always think, oh, the
They're
US
long
majors left
gone.
ages ago.
Right.
ExxonMobil and Shell hold the Bacton terminal and also a few southern North Sea gas assets, but they did
Mm.
try to sell them to Viaro earlier in the
Hmm.
year. But Total
Indeed.
Energies, they've left. Equinor, they threw their North Sea assets in with the majority of Shells with Adura.
Repsol's
A lot's
away
changed. Repsol's
with
changed.
their joint venture with Neonex Plus. Neonex Plus Plus Plus.
Yes,
Maybe Neonex Plus 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 if they buy BP.
maybe.
But
Well, do you know
we had
what?
them down at the bottom of the list of running riders, so of big acquirers.
Yeah.
That could possibly do the deal to buy BP's North Sea assets, because that's the question: who's going to buy it, and is it going to be in the same? Is it going to be sold as a oneer, or is it going to be broken off? And I mean,
Well,
that's probably what the 1,000 people who are working in the North Sea for BP are currently wondering. Are they going to be, separated from their colleagues, that they've been working together, in, that building in Dice for decades, maybe? And they're now facing moving off to kind of like new operators, or maybe just one other operator. But we don't know. We don't know.
yeah, certainly. And I think the thing it's important to mention BP's workforce because the day before this announcement was made, it announced that it was trimming 700 jobs globally. Now, how much of that's going to be from the UK, we don't know. However, you can insinuate based on the sort of pare down, maybe the North Sea will end up being impacted somewhat by this. But yeah, I think in terms of who's buying, you wrote that piece, that sort of analysis piece that went live on Monday that detailed Adura, but then Neil McCulloch, the CEO of Adura, has kind of said, "Well, I'm quite happy with the assets I have. I'm focusing on them." Is that still the case now that BP's looking to sell? We don't know, but that is the previous statement.
I had the number two on the
Yeah,
list behind Ithaca,
of
because of course
course.
the question is for Ithaca, having stepped away from maybe just looking at the west of Shetland assets, Glenlyon, Clare, or just Clare and Clare Ridge. Maybe if they sweeten the deal with Glenlyon west of Shetland, then Andrew and Etap in the central North Sea. I mean, that would be a game changer for Ithaca. And then, I mean, like, do they have the money? I guess is the question. I mean, the money is out there for, those sorts of things. And, it could be a very interesting combination. They have actually been buying, kind of like bunches of assets. They've just recently picked up Cygnus from Centrica.
Hmm.
So, Japex, for Seagull, and they did the Neptune energy deal, or any did anyway, kind of back in the day, which is kind of how it got all started before any and um, um, Adelic decided to join forces in the North Sea. So, but, and I think you're right. Maybe like Adira, already has a lot to kind of swallow,
Yeah,
with their
it's
joint venture. Plus, they're waiting on, what the heck is going to go on with Jackdaw, Rosebank. I mean, they've just got so much to deal with. They will have so much
100%.
to deal with, when those consultations end. And, potentially, probably they get the go ahead, in this new kind of pragmatic, kind of fan bully, era that we're hoping to see in the
Although
North Sea.
Although, is that really the same teams? Because obviously, right now it's very much getting operations up and running with Adura, with the Rosebank and Jackdaw situation. However, the only thing that's on the cards, at least from my sort of memory, at BP is Clare South, the Clare Phase 3, which doesn't seem to be anywhere near happening right now.
Mm.
However, that could sweeten the deal for another operator that's potentially looking to buy in. We've kind of ruled out Adura in our conversation now.
Sure, sure.
Ithaca's
Well,
obviously an
Adura is
option, but
already a shareholder in, the Clare
of course,
extension,
yeah,
so that would kind of like simplify things. But I kind
potentially.
of think, the tendency is to want to bring in investors because we know that, Ithaca would also really love to go ahead with Cambo,
Of course.
but I mean, having Shell having washed its hands of it a few years ago, you kind of think, well, if Rosebank goes ahead, that makes a lot of sense for Cambo and others and Clare west of Shetland. So, you're kind of like looking at just a few people, kind of with the money to spend. But the thing about Claire is it has been producing beautifully. And it's one of those things that, Gordon Burrell is BP's EVP upstream. And, he's always saying, he's been known to say that, the BP has like the best barrels, in terms of emissions, in terms of quality of the liquids and stuff like that. Although, I heard that, kind of when BP assets go, he's obviously staying, kind of with BP. He's on the bus because, they've got more things to focus on. They've got
100%.
Brazil, they've got Caspian, they've got North America. I mean, like, yeah.
Do you,
So there's a lot more going on for them.
I think we're running out of time in this segment, Erica. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat,
Oh
and I'm going to ask.
no.
I'm going to leave you to just giving me the answer. I don't want any elaboration, and people can read your copy from Monday if they want to find out
Just
more.
shut up.
You detailed Neonex Plus, Adura, obviously Ithaca, and even Serica as a potential to buy at least some of BP's assets.
Maybe.
Who's your favorite?
Carve up. If it's a carve up. You know what? Actually, I'm going to go completely off piste and say, I think actually, don't rule out the Middle East. Who's got like loads of money? ADNOC and Aramco. I mean, maybe they might think about, the changing winds in the North Sea and think it's time to get a little bit closer to the UK. But the reason that they have so much money is they make a lot of money. So maybe that would just rule them out. Can't
I
make money in the
lost
North
I
Sea.
lost track of how many words over the one word I gave you, Erica, but I was trying to count along. Anyway,
Oh,
stick around because after this break, we're going to go from a North Sea pair down to a growth in industry in the Highlands. Who knows? Let's find out.
want the energy stories that matter before everyone else? Sign up for the free Energy Voice daily briefing. Every morning, our team brings together the stories shaping UK energy alongside the analysis and context you need to understand what happens next. Join the thousands of energy professionals already subscribed. Scan the QR code on the screen or visit energyvoice.com/newsletters to get the free daily briefing.
Yeah, so from the dying days of one industry, maybe that might be a little bit provocative, to the growth in an area that was very much part of the oil and gas rollout in the 70s and 80s. Ardersier is looking to sort of deliver on its oil and gas its heritage by transitioning into wind. Erica, you've been up in the Highlands this week speaking to some very interesting people about opportunities there.
Sure. Well, talk about the past meeting the future. A very good symbol, almost, of it is the Ardersier facility. Of course, in the 1970s, there were over 4,000 people working there on the big rigs that have powered the North Sea for the last 40 years. But then, of course, if you go there today, like I was just a few days ago, it is a vast emptiness. But it's a vast emptiness full of potential, albeit delayed potential. So, I mean, what you were kind of looking at Ardersier, which of course is invested in and owned by Haventus. And of course, they are a company, that has brought in a lot of investor capital, including from quantum capital over in the US, as well as Scottish government, UK government. They've invested 400 million in this site. Now, it's empty. And of course, the main kind of pain point about that is they had been maybe going to be welcoming Ming Yang to
Hmm.
do a massive 1.5 million pound investment in the area, bring back, those thousands of workers and start kind of building out wind turbines, particularly aimed for deep water and floating wind. Deep water and floating wind is what Scotland is going to excel at eventually. But in the meantime, we haven't really seen these projects get off the ground. We've not seen anyone, put their pedal to the metal yet in terms of actually making these investments. So there's a lot of anticipation, there's a lot of delay. But the reason why I went up there was to see probably what could very well be, the poster child for Scottish entrepreneurial innovation and investment on the back of the potential of floating offshore wind. So, what the heck is that? Basically, that is the squid. The squid is a big yellow thing, and it's a design. It's a big, steel and tube invention that is currently sitting on the quayside at Ardersier. It is going to be tested, and it's the brainchild of a company called Encamera. Now, they have discovered this, they've developed the squid in order to kind of sit with every floating wind turbine and connect up, all of the cables, all of the moorings, and also enables it to plug in and then plug out when, they need to be either installed or taken away for being fixed for maintenance and stuff like that. Now, this is oil and gas technology being applied to what is going to be critical to the development of deep and floating offshore wind. And it's something that you wouldn't have even had to consider, as a wind developer, either onshore or shallow offshore, because things don't move around. But what this means is that, they've found that, kind of with existing floating offshore wind, you've had to kind of unplug them, tow them away, and that just wrecks the economics of, floating offshore wind. And then this is like a very simple, beautiful solution. Now, Ankimera is owned by Aurora Energy Services, which itself is a bit of a darling of Scottish government and UK government. They've invested in Aurora Energy Services, which is based in Inverness, and Aurora bought Ankimera. And it was just really cool to go see what this is and what they've achieved so far.
So tell me, because this is the Squid mooring system, and like you say, Dave Duguid has been a part of this and sort of like helped fund this, but it's sitting on the quayside, a demonstrator for this plug and play mooring system. It's sitting on the quayside. Have they given you any indication as to how many jobs manufacturing these things
Yes.
will create? Because they told me at the Floating Offshore Wind Conference in Aberdeen in November last year that they were going to manufacture in the UK. They were going to manufacture in Scotland specifically. So
Right.
that should create jobs. And when on earth is it going to hit market?
See, well, this is the, kind of quintessential how long is a piece of string question, whenever you're talking about anything with floating offshore wind. However, what they're doing right now is they're, running a test which will give them, the level of data that will enable them to be investable for insurance purposes, which sounds really dull, but is very key. Particularly if it's going to be used and sold and potentially exported. Now, currently, the model that they've got, sitting on the quayside, was manufactured in Huntley. So that's where Aurora has their fabrication unit, their main fabrication unit currently. And so they are thinking that the first step, that they could have would be to deploy maybe about 7 of these squids, for maybe a small, kind of trial 100 megawatt floating offshore wind project, say, for example, like Erebus in the Celtic Sea. That's a project being led by Total Energies and Simply Blue Group, or Pentland, floating wind farm, which would be super, super close. That's just kind of over in Dounreay. Now, our listeners will probably remember, kind of when we talked about the Pentland offshore wind farm. Now, they raised 150 million from, similar pools of investors, Scottish National Investment Bank, UK's National Wealth Fund. These are the same investors that have gone into. Now, pay attention. They've got into Aurora Energy Services. They are backing Aurora. They're the darlings. And then they're also hugely invested in Ardersier. So it's all like a little bit of a virtuous circle going up. It's a big thing. There's one more exciting thing to add before we go. I spoke to Ian Donald, Managing Director of Encamera, Doug Duguid, who's the Chief Executive of Indigo 7 Ventures, which is the investor behind Aurora Energy Services. But, what they do if they go for a big megawatt project would be to build a factory probably in Ardersier that would create about 130 jobs. So that's kind of the next step. But don't listen to me talk anymore. Listen to me speak to Ian Donald and Doug Duguid in Ardersier.
So the reason that Aurora invested in this technology is that it solves a lot of the significant installation issues in terms of being able to pre-install the season before. It simplifies the actual installation process. It avoids hardware having to be on the seabed through a winter season. It also, during the operational phase, allows simplified tow to port. It's a very robust, like many great ideas, it's simple. If you look at the basis of it, it's evolved from turret mooring systems that have been used in oil and gas for 4 decades. So it's a derivative of that.
That operations and maintenance phase is going to be crucial to be able to provide the floating wind industry with a means to take them back to ports in Scotland, and also to be able to deploy them and redeploy them if you're repowering throughout the season and over the winter period. The other key parts of this technology are that crossover point where on the daisy chain architecture, you're going to be able to take the power cables and cross them over, so as if you lose turbine number 3, you still keep the power and generation from turbines 1 and 2, which has another significant impact on the commerciality of floating wind.
So investment in a factory in Scotland looks like it's on the horizon, but let's find out what's happening south of the border, where refining maybe isn't as cushy.
Hey guys, guess what?
What is it, Erikka?
Energy Voice is on WhatsApp.
Oh, is that what's been making my phone buzz all day?
It really is. I mean, I can't stop buzzing about this. It's a great way to get the latest updates from Energy Voice, because anytime the latest story hits the site, it's out on WhatsApp, and then you get to find out what's going on.
And that makes a lot of sense, because, let's face it, that's how everyone shares their news, isn't it? You text it to your pals, you WhatsApp it to your pals. So your pals at Energy Voice are making sure that they're WhatsApping you with the latest headlines. Now, last but by certainly no means least, Floyd, you've been very quiet this episode. I hope it's not that you're shy of the cameras. I hope you're happy with that.
Yeah, I'm not a shy guy. I'm all right.
Good. Because you've been focusing on the refining sector in the north of England for quite a while now. Lindsey is obviously the sort of big story here. It's been evolving over time. We know that Phillips 66 has bought it, planning on mothballing the site, so on and so forth. But there was a real juicy development recently. Could you tell me a little bit about what's happening?
Yeah, sure. So obviously everyone knows, all the fans of the podcast will know about the Lindsey oil refinery, because it's basically all I ever talk about on this thing. But it's been quite quiet recently. Obviously Phillips 66, as you say, they bought it, planning on mothballing. It's gone pretty quiet whilst they, try and figure out all the storage logistics, how they're going to, move all the refined products from, their neighbouring Humber refinery, all that stuff. Not that newsworthy, but I'm sure Phillips 66 has been pretty busy. But yeah, it reared its head once more. So Glencore, who replaced Trafigura as a crude oil supply back in 2024, has alleged that the ex-owner of the refinery was involved in fraudulent conduct that led to the loss of millions of pounds worth of oil for them. So yeah, they've issued a high court submission against Prax, specifically against Winston Sousa-Paley. So yeah, 177 million of fraud they've accused them of. So yeah, it was pretty
bloody
interesting.
time someone tried to kind of like get those shysters.
Yeah.
No. About time someone really, kind of like narrowed in on, kind of like what absolutely went wrong with Prax, because like what an absolute abject disaster. And whoever decided that, it was a good idea to sell, kind of like massive assets like Lindsey, like the Shetland gas plant, to, kind of like these people, they need their heads examined.
Yeah, it was an interesting
I think that's
situation.
all our LinkedIn comments was.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it was an interesting situation when Prax burst onto the scene, wasn't it? Because obviously, I believe the owners of the company were their only connections to oil and gas previously was they'd owned petrol stations, I believe, was the situation, and they then bought up all these assets in the west of Shetland, which were then in turn bought by Serica, to bring the episode full circle to go back to oil and gas mergers and acquisitions. They obviously bought Lindsey. They had these real important projects that were, that had a lot of eyes on them and have a lot of jobs and investment tied to them. And it happened so fast. It happened it was like only within a few years that they'd amassed all these projects. And then things went wrong. Floyd, you were away to say something. I feel like I stepped on your toes there. What were you away to say?
Well, yeah, just that really. Like, ordinarily, it'd be a great story, right? People owning petrol stations, and now they're owning like massive infrastructure pieces. But like you say, it kind of all went wrong. But yeah, it was interesting in the High Court submission, because Glencore thought they were induced to deliver 177 million worth of crude oil. So they like fraud. They talked about fraudulent misrepresentations. But I just thought the wording was so funny, as if Glencore felt like they was tricked into to working with Prax, which is quite funny when you're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds and tons of oil. So yeah, quite funny how Glencore could feel duped into working with Prax. Quite funny wording, I thought, on the documentation.
So was this due to maybe the court filing didn't go into that much detail, but was this just due to like existing sort of deals with the Lindsey refinery before the Prax couple sort of came in and sort of took over, and is that why they're saying they feel duped, or what's going on?
Well, it's more the fact that they entered into an exclusive crude supply agreement with Lindsey with Glencore, so obviously that secured all the oil they needed for its operations. And then just a year later, in June that following year, the oil refinery shut. Glencore obviously thought they was going to have this big supply, big agreement with a major refinery in the UK, and then that just goes to kaput almost overnight. Then 2 weeks later, obviously the government say, oh well, there's not going to be a good enough buyer that we've seen. Woodmac saying that the refineries should be profitable. Glencore probably sat in the middle thinking like, what the hell is happening? So yeah, they're trying to get their money back.
I mean, that makes sense. Although I guess the question really is here, that Prax went bust, it went under, right? And so this attempt to take millions from the Prax owners, it's a case of, is this something that, I mean, I guess the courts will rule in time, but is this something that's going to be feasible? Is this something that, do they have that sort of cash at their disposal to hand over to Glencore, or let's face it, not hand over, to be
I don't think,
ripped from their
recovery.
grasp.
Yeah. Weren't the administrators maybe a little bit dismissive that there's no money left, like it's all done and dusted? And I think also the Prax directors don't seem to be having a very high profile, and they're certainly probably not in the UK anymore. So if you want to get your money, good luck. I think
Come find me.
The issue is absolutely. And because I think I mean, it was Total Energies that sold Lindsey to Prax, kind of like back in the day. They created this monster, but I don't even think, you know, you couldn't kind of chase them for cash either. I think it's mainly like a show. It will just be for a show. But hopefully, it will also kind of like lead to, kind of like, I don't know, international ignominy and, whatever, another kind of like sad footnote in the corporate history of the UK refining sector. Because again, I was thinking back to an article that Deepak Maheshwari, who is kind of senior leader of the Stanlow refinery, EET fuels, and of course, like he's kind of looking at what is left of the UK refining sector, after the collapse of Lindsey and it being used as just mainly a glorified storage facility, and where that puts us. It puts us in a tricky position, like in terms of we're going to be manufacturing sustainable aviation fuel, because like that's not happening yet, but we're reducing our capabilities for doing so. And then, we're screwed and we have to take, kind of like Russian jet fuel because we don't have any of that capacity in the UK. But actually, Floyd, you just wrote an interesting story about ET managed to scare up a bit of debt financing, and maybe that kind of is hopefully going to secure their future a little bit better, because you know what, this is going to cost. This is going to cost and cost and cost for us to get like hydrogen going, SAF going. Going to take a few pretty pennies, right?
Yeah, but they got nearly 300 million funding boost. Annoyingly, the press release was all in dollars. So I had to do like a million conversions. I hate maths, so by extension, I hate EET. So but no, just
it's
kidding.
Good that it's good that we're burning bridges this week. I'm glad to hear that.
But yeah, obviously, UK bank NatWest committed nearly 130 million, which is high street lenders. So that's quite a strong signal from EET's perspective. I was speaking to their comms guy, and he was saying like a UK high street bank investing in refineries at a time when refineries are shutting elsewhere, kind of solidifies their position to obviously be a key emitter and a hydrogen producer in the HyNet project, but also for their SAF adventures too. So obviously we spoke about posted children in the other segment, and EET Stanlow Refinery is definitely that in the refinery sector. So yeah, tons of cash to go at to boost their working capital. It's not money that's going to be spent specifically on projects, but obviously running a refinery is extremely expensive. So yeah, they just wanted to have some more working capital to kind of fund their wider $4.5 billion transformation strategy that needs to be done by 2035. So yeah.
Because of course EET is at the heart of the Northwest carbon capture project, and again that was like the flagship one, like alongside with Teesside and the Humber. They've got this 21.7 billion over kind of 25 years committed by the UK government, kind of like from kind of like, it was almost like ancient days, wasn't it? Because remember Ed Miliband was one of the first big spends he went for, albeit the CCUS project at that time was a Tory idea. So I don't know. It's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah. Miliband definitely stole their homework, but yeah, he'll be like, I wrote about it actually in the Ed Miliband obituary. So how CCS
it was called his legacy, but I'll take obituary.
So yeah, and obviously I spoke about CCS on that and how he probably like take that as like one of his wins, even though like it was like him like handing in someone else's homework. But yeah, CCS space, very exciting time. With doom and gloom in a lot of sectors, but CCS seems to really be pushing on in the last few weeks, both in the northwest of England and the northeast, of course.
Certainly. Well, I believe that does wrap up this week's episode. So thank you for sticking around and seeing our faces for half an hour of your morning. If you decided to watch the video version, and if you've been listening on your usual podcast platforms of choice, we love you just as much. But why not watch again and see us all in HD and see us in the flesh? But that does it for this week's episode. Now, so if you want to stay ahead of us before next week's episode, well, you can sign up to our daily newsletter. It hits your email inbox at 8:30 every morning. At least one, if not two, of our journalists slave away from 6:30 in the morning to make sure that you get the latest news. And then, no doubt, everything that's featured in there is spoken about here on Fridays. So that's how you can find out everything about the stories we're talking about before we even talk about them. So if that takes your fancy, you can find the link in our show notes below to sign up. And that does it for this week's episode. Thank you very much, Erikka and Floyd, for joining me, and thank you very much. We'll see you same time, same place next week.